Hey, my name is Marcus. Marcus Hale. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a rented house on the east side of Dunfield, Pennsylvania, a small city that sits in a valley between two ridges that catch clouds and hold on to them longer than anywhere else I've ever been. The house is a narrow two-story row home on Fenwick Street, built in 1928, with radiators that knock when they first heat up. A kitchen the width of a hallway. A staircase that turns sideways at the landing in the way of old houses built for shorter people, and a backyard that is mostly flagstone, and one dogwood tree that blooms pink for about 10 days every April and then goes back to being just a tree. I have lived there 4 years. The radiators no longer wake me up. I've made my peace with the staircase. I work in technical documentation for an industrial equipment manufacturer outside Dunfield. What that means, practically, is that I write and maintain the manuals, installation guides, service procedures, safety protocols, troubleshooting indexes, for machinery that costs more than most people's houses and operates in environments where an error in the instructions is not a minor inconvenience. I care about precision. I care about the sentence that could be misread, the instruction that leaves room for interpretation when there should be none. My job is to close those gaps. I spend my days writing things that will never be quoted, never be praised, and that nobody notices unless I've gotten something wrong. I find this satisfying in the specific way that work with a definable standard of correct is always satisfying. The document is right, or it isn't. You can check. It is not, I am aware, a romantic occupation. I watched enough eyes go slightly unfocused at parties in my late 20s when I tried to explain it to understand this. I don't take it personally. What I do matters in rooms I will never see, to people I will never meet, on days when something goes wrong and they need to know exactly what to do. That is enough. My days look like this. Up at 6:15. Coffee with the morning news. At my desk, I work from home 3 days a week. By 8, lunch I make myself, because I read once that making your own lunch is one of the few daily habits that is both cheaper and better. And this has proven correct. Done by 5 usually. Evenings I cook or read or work through something from the library queue. On Thursday nights, I go to trivia at a bar called Ferris & Sons on Culver Street because my coworker Diane persuaded me into it 2 years ago, and it turned out I was good at it, and I have gone nearly every week since. That is the shape of the week. There are other things sometimes, but Thursday is the constant. I should tell you about something that ended 3 years before this story, because it matters to what comes after. I was with someone named Elena for 2 years. We were well matched on the surface. Same tastes, same rhythm. We made each other laugh. What I understood eventually, in the slow way you understand what you've been avoiding looking at, was that I had been careful not to need too much from her, and that she had been equally careful not to need too much from me, and that we had built something very comfortable and almost entirely without risk, and called it a relationship. She said so first, on a Sunday morning in my kitchen, gently, the way you say a true thing that has been waiting. I said, I know. She said, I know you know. We sat with that. She moved out. That was the end. I didn't date anyone for the year after. Not deliberately. I wasn't punishing myself or protecting myself exactly. I just didn't find anyone who made me want to stop being careful. And I wasn't willing to build another comfortable, low-risk thing and tell myself it was different this time. I knew what that looked like. I knew where it went. That's the version of me that walked into Ferris & Sons on a Thursday in late February, 9 months before this story actually happens, and sat down at the corner table where Diane and her husband Greg already had beers waiting, and looked up when the door opened and saw a woman I'd never seen before come in out of the rain. She was with a friend. I'd learned her name was Bex, short for Rebecca, who ran the team at the table across from ours and had a standing rivalry with Diane that went back 2 years and involved a disputed answer about a Central American capital that both of them were still not over. The woman with Bex was carrying a wet umbrella and had the look of someone who'd just come in from somewhere less pleasant, damp coat, hair that had gotten the worst of it, but her expression as she scanned the room was alert and slightly amused. The look of someone taking in a new place without performing their reaction to it. She had dark hair and wore a dark coat and a yellow scarf that was, in that moment, the most specific thing in the bar. She found her chair. She picked up the answer sheet and read it. That was all. I went back to my beer. Her name was Nadia. Nadia Osei. I learned this 2 weeks later when she challenged a music question from across the room. She had strong opinions about the release year of a particular album and expressed them to the room at large without apparent concern for who was listening. And she was correct, and Diane leaned over and told me who she was. I said okay. We won that round. I drove home and thought about a woman in a yellow scarf with opinions about album release years for approximately a reasonable amount of time, and then went to sleep. She was there most Thursdays after that. We nodded. At the bar once we ended up beside each other, and she said something dry and precise about the host's approach to category selection, and I said something that made her laugh, the short, caught-off-guard version that gets out before a person decides whether to let it. We went back to our tables. I am telling you this carefully so you understand. Nothing happened fast, and neither of us pushed it. We were two people who were sometimes in the same room on Thursdays, and something built up in the space between us the way sediment does, slowly, without announcement, until one day there is more ground there than you remembered it containing. In May, the bar ran a charity fundraiser that combined teams, and I sat across from her properly for the first time. She worked in climate research at Dunfield University, large atmospheric data sets, modeling, trying to understand systems too complex for certainty and describe them honestly anyway. When I told her what I did, she thought about it and said, "You close gaps." I mapped them. I spent 3 days turning that sentence over. There was something in it I kept needing to return to, the way I return to a phrase in a document that is almost right, and I can't identify why it's keeping me. By June, we talked most Thursdays. By July, Thursday had a quality the other days didn't, and I was honest enough with myself to understand why, and careful enough to not act on it. I was, in the terms Elena had not quite used but had meant, not risking needing too much. I recognized this in myself. I did not immediately correct it. In August, a man named Theo began appearing with the university group. Tall, easy in rooms, the kind of person who has never had to work at being comfortable somewhere new. He sat next to Nadia twice. The third Thursday, he brought her a drink from the bar without being asked. She accepted it. I was at my table watching this and I made no expression, and then went to get my own beer and stood at the bar for longer than I needed to. Diane said nothing. She watched me stand there and said nothing, and handed me my change when I came back and talked about the next question category. I have always appreciated Diane's restraint. Over 3 weeks I watched Theo apply himself in the way some men do, consistently, visibly, with the patient investment of someone who believes that sustained attention is itself attractive. He made Nadia laugh. She did not appear to be discouraging it. I had no standing to have any feelings about this, and I knew that, and it did not help. On the last Thursday of August, I was at the bar when Nadia came up beside me. We'd answered a question about Pacific Ocean currents together across tables earlier. She'd known it cold. I'd known half. Together we got it right. She ordered her drink, Then, looking at the bar rather than at me, she said, "What do you think of Theo?" The honest answer was right there. I let it go. "Seems like a decent person," I said. "Why?" "He's been asking about me. What do you think of him?" She picked up her drink. She looked at me, the quick, reading look, and then she said, "He's fine. Very fine, actually." A pause. "I was just wondering what you thought." "I don't know him well enough for a real opinion," I said. Which was technically accurate. Which was also a lie in the way that a sentence can be technically accurate and still be missing the only true thing it could contain. She received this with a small, calibrating shift in her expression and went back to her table. I stood at the bar for a moment with the particular quality of someone who has passed on the only thing worth saying and is beginning to understand the price of that. The following Thursday, Theo was there. The bar was crowded, and the only open seat near anyone I knew was at a combined table that included Nadia's group. I sat down. Theo was across from me, next to Nadia, talking to someone I didn't know. He glanced at me when I sat in the way of someone doing a quiet accounting of a room. Bex said, "Marcus, are you coming to the faculty end-of-term thing next month?" I said I wasn't faculty. "You could come as someone's guest," she said, with a neutrality that was its own kind of statement. And then Theo said, "To the table in general, is Marcus seeing anyone?" 2 seconds of silence. The honest answer sitting right there, available. I said, "Yeah. Been seeing someone for a little while. I am aware of how this sounds. I have thought about it carefully and honestly, the way I approach a document that has a fault I need to locate. The reason, as best I can reconstruct it, I was afraid of what saying no meant I would have to do next. Saying no in that room, at that table, with Theo looking at me the way he was looking at me, meant something would be set in motion that I would have to either commit to or retreat from, and I was not ready to do either. A lie felt like staying still. A lie felt like keeping the Thursdays exactly as they were without risking what they could become. That is the logic. I am not asking to be absolved of it. It was the wrong choice, and I knew it when I made it. Theo nodded. Bex looked at me with something I couldn't parse. Nadia was looking at the answer sheet. I did not look directly at her for the rest of the evening. I drove home that night in the particular company of a problem that is entirely your own construction, which is a specific and unpleasant kind of company to keep. September. The imaginary girlfriend required maintenance. She worked in pharmaceutical sales. She traveled constantly, which explained her absence from every Thursday for the foreseeable future. She had, by the 3rd week, acquired a name, Claire. For the first 2 weeks, she had existed as a nameless concept, which I found obscurely distressing in a way I couldn't fully articulate. A person without a name is harder to maintain. I gave her Philadelphia as a hometown and a general region of the pharmaceutical industry, and I did not add more than was asked for, which I told myself was a form of restraint. I knew it was not a form of restraint. Diane found out on a Tuesday in early September. She called for a work reason, a documentation question. Something about a deadline, and I was at my desk and unguarded, and she asked how things were going, and I told her. All of it. The February feeling, the August lie, the Claire construction, the reasoning behind it, which I heard out loud, and which sounded exactly as defensible as it was, which was not very. There was a silence on the phone that lasted about 5 seconds. Then she said, "Marcus." I said, "I know." She said, "How long has the actual feeling been going on?" I said, "Since February." Approximately another silence. "And you built a fictional girlfriend instead of just saying so." I said, "Correct." She was quiet long enough that I thought she was composing something measured and useful. Then she said, Fix it before it finds a worse way to come apart. And returned. Without transition. To the documentation question. I have thought about that phone call more times than she probably knows. She did not tell me how to fix it. She did not tell me I wasn't an idiot. She told me the true thing, which was that a problem you build yourself does not stay the shape you built it in. What I had not calculated, that having made things worse, they would also remain the same. Nadia and I still talked on Thursdays. The Thursdays still had the quality I had been going to them for. She was still there, same chair, same reading look, still answering questions about her research when I asked in the direct and interested way of someone who has stopped pretending the interest isn't personal. She mentioned Claire once in October, asked, in passing, if she was from Dunfield originally. I said Philadelphia. I delivered the detail with a specificity I found shameful in real time and still find shameful now. She nodded and let it move on. Theo stopped coming by the middle of September. I didn't know why. I told myself it wasn't relevant. But here is what I was living inside without fully understanding it yet. She kept coming, every Thursday through September and October, in the particular purposeful way of someone who has decided to be somewhere and is going to keep deciding it. And I kept going. We were both still there every week, as if we were both waiting for the same thing, from opposite sides of the waiting. On a Thursday, in late October, the bar had a private event in the back room. Trivia ran to a smaller crowd than usual, quieter than it ever got on a normal night. By 9 o'clock, there were 12 people left across 3 tables. Diane and Greg had left at 8:30 for a babysitter situation. The 2 people I was nominally sharing a table with had drifted into their own conversation about something that clearly didn't include us. It was effectively Nadia and me at a table, and neither of us moved. She had a glass of white wine she'd been nursing since 8. I had a second beer. The bar was doing its low-light, quiet Thursday version of itself, and the question rounds had started to feel incidental. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not the usual Thursday bar version, the longer kind, where you stop tracking rounds and the conversation becomes the actual reason you stayed. She told me about her research in the real version, not the cocktail party summary. The scale of atmospheric models, the particular intellectual difficulty of representing uncertainty honestly when the system you're modeling is too vast and too interconnected for certainty, when the best you can offer the reader is the most accurate description of what you know alongside the most honest description of what you don't. Most people want a fixed answer, she said. A number. A prediction, a chart that ends in a point rather than a range. I spent years wanting to give them that. I've gotten more interested in the honest margin of error, the place where the model has to say, beyond this, we cannot be certain. But here is the shape of the uncertainty. Here is what it looks like and why. She paused. That's harder to publish. Editors want the point. Documentation is the opposite problem, I said. The engineers want ranges, operational windows, acceptable variances, degrees of tolerance. My job is to take all of that and give the technician a single clear action. Do this. At this setting. In this sequence. Because in the field, a range is a liability. You're collapsing the uncertainty so someone can act on it, she said. Right, and she's expanding it so someone can understand it. Between us, we cover the whole problem, she said. I looked at her. Theoretically, she said. And she looked at her wine. I told her about the hydraulic press manual, about interviewing the engineers who had designed the system, the technicians who serviced it, the maintenance workers who had made the actual mistakes that had to be written into the troubleshooting guide so that future workers could avoid them, about writing the procedure for the person who was tired, or rushing, or frightened because something has already gone wrong and they have 30 seconds to make the correct choice. You can't write for the person with all the information and all the time, I said. That person never exists when something goes wrong. You have to write for the person who has neither, at the worst moment, under pressure. And your job is to make sure the language still works for them. She was quiet for a moment. That's what I'm trying to learn to do with teaching, she said. Write the assignment for the students who are actually in front of me. Tired, behind, slightly scared. Not for the students I'd prefer. A pause. I'm better at it in the research than in the room. In the research, I've trained myself to ask, who needs to read this, and what do they not know that I know? In the classroom, I keep defaulting to what I'd want to read. What would interest me? The gap between who you're writing for and who you're imagining, I said. Yes, she said. That exactly. We stayed until last call, standing up to leave, pulling on coats. She said, I always forget you're funny until you remind me. I said, I always forget how generous you are until you remind me. She looked at me, that reading look. Held for longer than I was used to, as if the calculation had arrived at something and she was deciding what to do with it. Then she looked away. We walked out together into the November cold. In the parking lot, heading for our cars, she said, How's Claire? I stopped walking. She stopped 2 paces ahead and turned around. The overhead light caught the side of her face. She was looking at me with the full attention she brought to things that mattered. I should tell you something, I said. Okay, she said. She did not move. Claire doesn't exist. I invented her in August when Theo asked if I was seeing anyone. I invented her because I was afraid of the real answer to why I wasn't. I stopped. I'm sorry. It was the wrong thing, and I knew it when I did it, and I've been carrying it since September, and I should have said this weeks ago. She was quiet. I understand if this, I started. Marcus, she said. I stopped. I knew about Claire in September, she said. I stared at her. Bex knows Greg, she said. Something was mentioned in passing without anyone realizing it was significant. By the 3rd week of September, I was almost certain Claire wasn't real. She paused. Not completely certain, but almost. Why didn't you say anything? She looked at me steadily. Because I was waiting to see if you would, she said. And because, she paused, gathering it. I had said the first thing before. I had been the one who felt it more clearly and said it before the other person was ready, and I had been wrong about the readiness, and it had not gone well. I made a decision somewhere around March that if this was going to become something, it needed to come from you. Or it wasn't going to happen. She held my gaze. So I came back every Thursday. When Claire appeared, I told myself, if this is real, step back. If it's fear, wait for him to admit it. My throat had closed. I was saving myself for you to be honest, she said, more quietly. That's what it was. I know how it sounds. But I'd already been patient for 8 months. A little longer felt possible. I should have said something in March, I said. March was very available, she said. I was scared, I said. Of being wrong about what I was feeling, of losing the Thursdays if I said it and it went sideways. I know, she said. I could see that. That's partly why I was patient. I knew what it cost you to be careful. A pause, quiet. It costs me things too. Just different things. I crossed the distance between us. The parking lot was empty, Culver Street half a block away. The November cold doing what November cold does. I stood in front of her and said, I don't want to keep being careful in ways that cost me the things I actually want. I've been doing that for long enough. She looked up at me. I know, she said. 9 months. I watched it. She put her hand against the front of my coat. I put my hand over hers. And I kissed her in the parking lot outside Ferris & Sons on Culver Street. In the November cold, which was the least careful thing I had done in years, and the truest. And it felt exactly like a document that has finally been revised to what it should have said from the beginning. We stood in the cold for a while afterward. The Culver Street traffic had gone quiet. The bar had turned off its outdoor sign. At some point she said, 9 months, Marcus, February to November. I know. March was right there. April, May through October were all right there. I know, I said. I was slow. Very slow. She said. The small, real smile came up. Not the managed version, the genuine one. The one I'd been filing away on Thursday nights since February against the possibility I'd want it later, and which I now intended to have available for a long time. But you got there. For future reference, I said, if you'd said something in March, I would have said yes. I know, she said. That is exactly why it was hard to wait. I laughed. It came out unguarded and full, the way laughing does when you've been holding something tightly for too long and it gets to release all at once. She laughed too, and it was the full version, the one she didn't manage, the one I'd heard 4 or 5 times in 9 months and had cataloged each time without knowing that's what I was doing. We texted for 2 hours after getting home that night. I mention this because it had the quality of something I'd forgotten was possible. The complete absence of the careful management I'd been applying to everything involving her since February. We talked about the October conversation, about uncertainty and documentation, and the gap between who you write for and who you're imagining. And at some point we were talking about none of those things, and neither of us noted the transition. I fell asleep past midnight and was at my desk by 8 and considered neither of these things a problem. Diane said, the following Tuesday, I heard. I said, from who? Greg heard from Bex. Bex was told by Nadia. It reached me Saturday morning. A pause. I want you to know I knew in February. I know you knew in February, I said. I exercised extraordinary restraint, she said. I know, thank you. You could have saved 9 months, she said. I know. For future reference, she said, and the fact that she used the exact phrase Nadia had used, which I had not told her, told me that Nadia had told Bex rather more than the basic facts. The window is usually open longer than you're afraid it is. I've been told, I said. She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her screen. In December, she came to Fenwick Street for the first time. She walked through the rooms with the attention she brought to things she was actually looking at, and she stopped in front of the built-in bookshelf in the back room and ran her hand along the top shelf and said, "You built this." When I moved in, I said, the room needed something. "It's well done," she said. She meant it precisely. Later, in the kitchen that was the width of a hallway, making dinner together in the careful choreography that 2 people develop when a space requires coordination, she said, "I need to tell you something about Theo." "You don't." "I want to," she said. She handed me a spoon without interrupting the timing of what she was doing. "I told him you were taken. In September, when he asked about you, I told him you were unavailable." She looked at me steadily. "That's why he stopped coming." I stood there. "As far as I could determine," she said, "you were taken. You just hadn't finished arranging the details yet." "You told him I was taken," I said, "while I was pretending to have a girlfriend." "Yes, because you'd already decided." "I decided in March," she said. "I spent the rest of the year waiting for you to confirm it." I looked at her. In the narrow kitchen with the radiators knocking and the flagstone yard dark outside the window, I looked at this woman who had been patient with me in a way I had not deserved, and had come to Fenwick Street and was making dinner in my kitchen, and had told a man in September that I was taken, because she had already decided that I was. And I thought, I am going to spend a long time being grateful I looped back around. For the record, she said, because she is a researcher and she means things precisely. I was not certain. I was working with the most accurate available description of a probable outcome. And the data said, you looked up when I walked in the first night, she said. It said you remembered in May that I'd mentioned once not liking cilantro and ordered accordingly. It said you asked about my research in the specific way, not the polite way. The data was clear. You were just slow to write up the findings. That is the most accurate thing anyone has ever said about me, I said. She smiled, the full one. I know, she said. I've been taking notes. The radiators knocked once and settled. The kitchen was warm. Outside the window, the dogwood in the backyard was bare against a dark December sky, waiting for April with the patient certainty of something that has done this before and knows it will come back. 8 months after the parking lot, Nadia presented the paper that was 3 years of her research at a conference in her field. I sat in the back of the room and watched her explain uncertainty to 100 other researchers with the clarity and authority of someone who has been practicing for the talk that matters. When she said, "The most honest description of a system is not the one that eliminates uncertainty. It's the one that maps it accurately and works honestly within it," I thought, that's what we built. Not a fixed answer. An accurate description of the gap between us. For 9 months, and then the closing of it. Ferris & Son still runs trivia on Thursdays. Diane and Bex have not resolved the Central American capital dispute. It has been 2.5 years. Neither of them shows any interest in resolving it, which I have come to believe is the actual point. The dogwood on Fenwick Street blooms pink every April for 10 days. Nadia has seen it twice now. The second time, she didn't take a photograph. She stood in the kitchen with her coffee and looked at it through the window, the quiet way you look at something that has become yours. I have thought a great deal since a November parking lot on Culver Street about the cost of being careful. Not the dramatic cost, not loss or rupture, the quiet one. 9 months of Thursday nights that were good, but not what they could have been. 9 months of driving home in the warmth of a good evening, one honest sentence away from something better, choosing the careful option instead. I thought I was protecting the Thursdays. I was only delaying them. The gap was closable the whole time. The sentence was there. I had just been afraid that writing it would change the document too much to take back, when actually the document was always supposed to say exactly that. It just needed someone patient enough to wait for the writer to stop being afraid of his own best line.